Okay, everyone, and you would have figured out, I would have had the right page in front of me to start this. I will call to order the January 28th meeting of the Finance Committee. Good afternoon. This is an open meeting of the Finance Committee, is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public meetings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. This order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment as previously noted. Please note the meeting's being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided by this body are on the town's website unless otherwise noted, and the public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I know otherwise. And this is how I should have started, so I got my pages backward. We are now using Zoom webinar for meetings, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. People registering to be an attendee must use their names, otherwise they will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. Attendees will join in listening mode. They can click the raise hand button if they wish to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hands in the order in which they were raised. The YouTube chat will no longer be enabled. And as a preliminary, I'm now going to confirm member access. So as a preliminary matter, I am Denise Cronow, the chair of the Nantucket Finance Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. I will not use last names unless your name is Peter. So first, George.
Aye.
Thank you, George. Peter Schaefer.
Aye.
Thank you. Peter McEachern.
Aye.
Joanna. She's raised her hand. She's here. Stephen.
Here.
Thank you. Stephen, you're muted as well. Joe.
No.
Aye.
Am I muted? You can't hear me?
Now you're unmuted. Yeah.
Okay.
Jill.
Aye.
And Chris.
Aye.
Thank you. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Brian.
Here.
Rachel.
Here.
Greg.
Here.
Libby.
Here.
Terry.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I'll ask the members if they have any comments. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. And yeah, and finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Okay, so we've already made the announcement that this is being audio and video recorded, right, Brian? You remembered to hit recording?
I did.
Good, excellent. May I have an approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, George,
Aye.
Peter Schaefer,
Aye.
Peter McEachern,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Stephen,
Aye.
Denise, I. Okay, I will now open it up to public comments. I do not see any hands raised. And I will close public comment. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the adoption of minutes for January 11th, 14th, and 19th. Does anyone, before I ask someone to make a motion, does anyone have any changes or edits to any of those minutes?
Look good to me.
Okay,
Looked
thank you.
fine.
Okay, great. Terry, thanks for making the changes to the 14th. I noticed on the second version. So with that, may I please have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
And this is to approve all three. Second?
Second.
That's what we're up to now. Okay, George. You have to say aye or nay.
Aye, sorry,
Okay.
elsewhere.
Peter Schaefer,
Aye.
Peter McEachern,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Stephen,
Aye.
Denise, aye. It's unanimously approved. Okay, thank you. Does anyone have anything new in any of their committee reports? If so, raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll move past that. Nothing.
Nope.
Okay, thank you. So Brian and Libby, it's over to you and the proposed fiscal year 22 general fund budget recommendations. And as an opening, I would like to say, excellent budget report. I enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. We appreciate that. So Brian and I have sort of tag teamed this, and I'll start out and we kind of go back and forth depending on what the content of the slide is. Section 4.2 D3 of the town charter requires the town manager to prepare and submit to the select board an annual operating budget. So in your packet here, we have our presentation that we gave to the board on December 9th. We gave we gave this same presentation to the school committee on January 5th, I believe it was. I think January 5th, right, Brian? Beginning of January, earlier in the month. And you have the draft budget, the final budget message, I believe, as the chair just pointed out. And I think that's what's basically in your packet. So we're going to take you through the presentation. We weren't intending to go through the budget message, but if you have any questions about it, we're happy to try to answer them. Let's see here. Okay, just brief overview of the budget itself. This budget process began with a review of preliminary projected expenses and revenues with the FinCom on September 21st, the Select Board on September 23rd. We issued budget instructions to the town departments on September 25th, and we reviewed every general fund budget from mid-October through November. We also reviewed enterprise fund budgets, but those are being handled, the review of those was a bit separate, and we're not intending to go through those tonight. You'll get those at your session next weekend. We also had an ad hoc budget work group meeting on November 16th. That work group is comprised of the chairs and vice chairs of the Select Board, School Committee, Finance Committee, the School Superintendent, Town Manager, and Director of Finance. Along the way, we take in, seek out, review, or analyze new or additional or updated information. The slide 2 shows our fiscal 22 budget objectives, and they pretty much are as indicated on there. Keep the operating budget within projected revenue, address priorities in the board's strategic plan, address emerging PFAS issues, continue response to COVID-19. Coastal resilience is obviously a theme as well. We are trying to maintain some flexibility with the levy limit and the use of free cash with this budget. In other words, we're trying not to spend every bit of revenue that we have projected. Slides 3 and 4 relate to initiatives specific to the board's strategic plan that are recommended in the fiscal 22 budget or are ongoing. I won't go through all of them, but they're shown here. Happy to answer any questions if people have them. COVID response and PFAS budgetary items are shown on slide 4. We have a number of initiatives already underway, which will continue into fiscal 22 as listed here. And there are some opportunities we are exploring, including Park and Rec and the community school. I've been mentioning this sort of as a broad overview. We are having discussions with community school staff and school department staff about the feasibility of, I hesitate to call it a merger, but for lack of a better word, some kind of merger between the town's recreational function and the community school. The community school has already an infrastructure set up for programming. And I know there are community concerns about the town's park and rec function. The maintenance of parks is already handled within the Department of Public Works. It's the recreational component, I think, that is the issue here. So a lot of things have changed since the community school came into being, including things like, in no particular order, school security issues, COVID now, remote learning, space at the school. And at the same time, we have a park master plan that could use a shepherd. And so the thinking is we might be able to a little bit kill two birds with one stone here by addressing town recreational needs with some kind of a merge with the community school. But there are some legal issues to examine and work through. So we're having these internal discussions now, like I mentioned. We are seeking to, just one last thing on that. We are seeking to co-locate public health and natural resources at the old fire station property, at least on a temporary basis, until we have our municipal facilities master plan completed and hopefully worked into the capital improvement plan. And another theme going into 22, and actually right now in 21, is diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We have hired a DEI director. He will start on March 1st. He will be introduced at the select board meeting next week. And we're really looking forward to getting a lot of different initiatives underway with his kind of new department. So, slide 6, several actions are listed here that we take on an ongoing basis to reduce expenses and increase efficiency and transparency. While COVID-19 has certainly presented numerous challenges, there may be some benefits which could be realized that we hope to explore further going forward. And one of them might be online meetings like this, training that employees could do online rather than having to travel off island. Some of that's not feasible because you need to do in-person things, but some of that could perhaps continue on an ongoing basis. I don't think we're going to go this far, but in the town of Barnstable, for example, they are very actively looking at, if not already moving towards, remote work permanently by many of their town employees from home or wherever, but not coming into a building with a lot of employees in it. Brian is going to take us through slides 7 through 14.
Thank you, Libby.
I'm sorry, Libby. And Brian, is there any way to make it a little bit bigger? Because we have a lot of, from my view, I have a lot of gray and very little white chart. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay.
I mean, I could read it, but it was a little bit hard, and
Sorry about that.
that's perfect. No problem. Thank you.
I told you it was going to be Zoom 1, Brian 0, right? So the overview of the fiscal 22 general fund budget that we presented to the select board, we projected total revenues of $111,382,000, which is net of property tax abatements. We're projecting $250,000 to be utilized for property tax abatements in the fiscal 22 budget. Expense total projecting $110,746,000, which at this stage would leave us unused levy capacity of $635,000. It's important to note that we typically try to leave a little bit of levy capacity unused as we go through this budget process, just because we typically don't have all of the information relative to everything as we begin this presentation. Some of the outstanding items, which we'll discuss later, being what the state aid will look like. We also, as everybody is cognizant of, we make transfers to 3 enterprise funds, or 2 enterprise funds, excuse me. We make to our island home and to solid waste. Solid waste has been trending a little bit downward, so there's a possibility of needing to potentially increase that subsidy in fiscal 22, which is one of the reasons why we've recommended not using the full levy capacity at this current point in time. Next slide here, slide 8, shows the comparison to the fiscal 21 budget. One thing that we'll note, there's a substantial increase in rooms and meals tax. In discussion with town administration, we believe, based on activity from fiscal 21 actuals, that we can raise rooms and meals tax. Last year, we actually did not include any meals tax in the calculation because we were not sure what would happen with the summer season at the time we were preparing the budget. So we have made provision for meals tax to be included in the revenue calculation, as well as include increased rooms occupancy projections, and have also increased building permits slightly above what we had reduced them to last year. We have projected fiscal 22 state aid to remain level funded at approximately $3.88 million. This was based on the fact that after we had set the budget in July, the governor announced that they would hold fiscal 21 level with fiscal 20. So we are projecting that we will be relatively very close to that same number for fiscal 22. So on the bottom half of that, it shows the projection of the 110,746,000, and the revenues are raised to match that exact, showing a balanced and level budget as recommended. This next slide indicates and shows that, as most of you know, we discuss this every year, approximately 86% of all revenue is derived from real and personal property tax. The next highest revenue generator for us is rooms and meals tax at 5%, state aid being 4%, and everything else being less than 2% or less. The next slide, slide 10, shows just the breakout between school department, municipal departments. Special appropriations are the transfer to the two enterprise funds. Non-departmental is all the health insurances, debt service, retirements, and things of that nature. Now we break down the categories for you here. Town operational expenses are projected to be $8.8 million. There's $1,361,000 of expense increase requests included in that number. Town salaries are projected to be $21,645,000 with $604,000 of new personnel requested in the budget. School operational expenses, $5,536,000. There's $225,000 of expense increase requests that the school discussed, and we have recommended as part of that $5.5 million number. And school salaries of $27,340,000. Should note that the school, we did discuss this extensively with the school, so these numbers that have been presented here have been shown to the school committee, and the administration at the school was in agreement with the recommendations. Health insurance, active, we break this out now between active and retirees, projecting a 7.06% increase in the insurance on a year-over-year basis. Due to changes and fluctuations in the internal metrics and usage between with staff, the actual rate increase is projected at this point to be 10%, but it actually works out to a 7% increase in actual dollars in the budget on a year-over-year basis. General insurance is projected to rise to $3.1 million, which is an 18% increase, and we're in active discussions with our insurance providers. We're hoping that 18% is enough. Last season was one of the busiest storm seasons in recent history, and it was the 7th most expensive in terms of damages done. And we unfortunately do at some points bear some of the repercussions of the damages from all those major storms across the country. So we're working very hard to keep that to 18%, and that was the initial projection. So hopefully it'll be less than that when we have our final discussions. Debt service, as per the established schedule that we have, it's $10,008,000. Retirement is consistent at an 8.5% increase to $5.6 million, which is consistent with the funding schedule from Barnstable County that was approved by PARAC. Enterprise fund subsidies, which I will go into a little more detail in the free cash slide as well, are projected to increase to $10,002,000, which is a 1.61% increase. We have recommended the same allocation as we did last year for Health and Human Services for the Contract Review Committee of $650,000. There was a small 2.5% increase this year in the county assessment from 172.01 to the 174,455. Reserve fund, we have made no recommended change to the $500,000. Unpaid bills, $20,000. And other post-employment benefits, as most of you will recall, last year when we redid the budget for the June town meeting, we had eliminated the contribution to the other post-employment benefits trust fund. We are recommending that we restart that this year. Cherry sheet charges are estimated at 984,000. I do believe that based on yesterday, that might slightly increase, but we're still waiting to see what the House and the Senate do. Community school, we have made no provision for an increase to the 550,000, and that was done in conjunction and consultation with the school. And minimum capital funding according to the town code of 974,000. All told brings us to the expenses of $110,746,540. And Libby, I have to admit, I forget, am I doing this one or are you?
You're doing this one and I start with the next one.
Okay. So as the Finance Committee is aware, we go through a very rigorous process with the expense increase request. This current fiscal year, there was $4,281,000 of submitted requests. We have recommended $3,098,553 of requests, broken down between $1,265,000 of one-time requests and ongoing requests to be funded through available tax levy, alternate funding sources, free cash, or potential revenue increases, of which there has been no recommendations to those, of $1,833,533.
Thank you, Brian. Next is our EIRs, which we're going to take you through. We weren't really going to go through every single one of them, but rather give you an overview. Our recommendations for EIRs are based on the following criteria: whether or not it's a legal mandate, high priority is given for requests that support the strategic plan and or are recommended in our staffing study, if you will recall from a couple of years ago, if the item improves departmental operations or efficiency, if it's necessary to support approved new programming or existing programming, or continuity of operations. We rank each one using a point system. The recommended EIRs are shown on this slide. Just an overview of the recommendations include, okay, don't freak, but it's 9 new positions. However, before you get all blah about that, 3 of those new positions were in our original fiscal 21 budget, but we took them out because of, we all know we had to reduce the fiscal 21 budget. So those are back in. 3 are seasonal positions, community service officers, that were also in the original fiscal 21 budget, and as well as some additional lifeguard and seasonal staff positions for COVID beach protocols anticipated to continue into next summer. So there's really technically 3 new positions. Funding for strategic planning initiatives and facilitation, vehicle and equipment replacements. Housing expenses, this is a kind of a big one. It's $200,000 for potential housing expenses, which relate directly to potential COVID requirements for seasonal staff. It would be great if we don't have to do this, but we had to budget it because we do not know at this point whether those protocols are going to be required going into the summer season. We also have funded transitional housing for department head level positions as needed. So we basically have rented a housing unit to keep open for whoever might be hired in a specialized type of position, that we will have housing available for them. We have found it extremely challenging to attract and retain qualified staff if we do not have that. And that is obviously pretty common in the private sector. We also have some additional funds for maintenance of municipal facilities and infrastructure. And again, some of these items were included in the original fiscal 21 budget, but removed at the 2020 annual town meeting. Brian, you're going to take us through 16 and 17.
So how do we get to the $3,098,000? $1,333,000 tax levy and general revenues, free cash $925,000. As part of the capital exclusion, we're recommending $70,000 be added to that, which is for the replacement of 2 vehicles. Special revenue funds, $270,000 being the ferry embarkation fee, of $40,000 for the additional CSOs, as well as $230,000 from the beach revolving fund for the potential additional lifeguard requirements due to COVID. And then a borrowing of $500,000, which is directly related to the ongoing PFAS work that's has been undertaken. So all told, those funding sources total $3,098,553. Preliminary free cash recommendation, which as we continue to move through the budget cycle and conversations with FinCom is subject to change as noted. General fund certified free cash was certified at $9,655,001. Town increase request one time $925,000. School expense increase request one time $150,000. There's $4,992,000 worth of capital requests. Unpaid bills of $20,000. Our Island home, which is listed here as $3,500,000. As we discussed with the select board, it is the intent of town administration to recommend that the $5 million override be put back before the voters in the budget and on the ballot. However, should that not pass, we need to have a funding source to fund the majority of that override, which would be the $3.5 million, which if everyone recalls, we funded the operations of the Island home this year using $3.5 million of free cash and $1.5 million of their certified retained earnings to balance the budget after the decision was made not to use the successful ballot override passage and proceed to the vote at town meeting for the budget. So because we are putting that forward this year, we do have to have some type of reserve and held back in the event that the override were not successful, because it would require a town meeting at some point to balance that budget prior to setting the tax rate. So that would leave us at this point of unallocated free cash of $67,747.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a list of, as you can see, outstanding items and current unknowns. Some of this has progressed a bit since we initially gave this presentation to the board on December 9th. Ryan just reviewed with you the Island Home Prop 2.5 override, and as well as state aid. We do have Harbor Place a little bit hanging out there. We appropriated $150,000 at the 2020 annual town meeting to do a study on what the potential concepts might mean for the town and to help sort of design the transportation component of that project. And because of COVID, that has not progressed overly far. We've had a couple of meetings with the owners, and we're still working on the study with our engineer, Weston and Sampson. We did engage them in the fall, and that continues. So, but one of the needed items in association with this project would be a zoning bylaw change. And I think that is not going to be ready for the 2021 annual town meeting, nor would a development agreement be ready. We haven't even really started on that in a serious way. So it remains to be seen a little bit, which is why we put it on this slide. The potential cost impact of citizen warrant articles is not included in our budget recommendations. There are several citizen warrant articles that could have a potential cost impact if approved, and we have not worked that in here at all. Fee increases are something that we typically look at annually. We've reviewed the possibility of a sort of a CPI across the board type increase for town fees. At best, that might generate an additional $50,000 to $100,000. However, we need to be careful about why we're increasing fees. They really ought to be tied to a documentable increase in town resources or costs, not just to get more revenue. Also, the timing, we aren't really sure it's very appropriate right now. The steamship deficit, while resolved for fiscal 20, could remain a concern for 21 and possibly 22. We're hopeful that it will not be an issue based on what I've heard most recently in the past couple of weeks. Their reservations are way up. So that is, I think, good news for the most part with respect to whether or not they would have a deficit. If they did experience a deficit, Nantucket is responsible for 35% of it. And so we really hope we don't have to go down that road. Nantucket Regional Transit Authority, if they were to experience a deficit, we hope it would be covered through other means, federal transportation dollars, hopefully, but we don't really know. And we haven't heard if there's a deficit with them or not. PFAS and COVID-19 obviously remain high concerns. Costs, mostly on the PFAS side, very largely unknown. We are finalizing our townwide risk assessment, and we hope that will give us some information as to where we ought to be deeply looking to deal with PFAS if it is found in certain areas, like potentially the landfill, potentially the sewer treatment facilities. And of course, we have some other projects, another project that's underway now in the design and engineering stages to extend water to an area near the airport. And I won't go into that whole thing, but because that we'd be here for, that's a whole other meeting. The DEI office, I think I mentioned. Short-term rentals, I think that we are most likely going to, and we're not prepared to get deep into this today, but most likely going to increase our projection for fiscal 22 from short-term rental revenue. We did get in more rent revenue in 20 and 21 to date than we had originally anticipated, I believe. Brian could elaborate on that. But Brian and I do have a bit of a concern about getting too out there with short-term rental projections, because we have still not seen one full year of normal short-term rental revenue. It's good news that it's a lot, but there's any number of theories as to the reason for that. And I think we want to be conservative about that until we have a year or two under our belts. We've titled this next item the new growth bubble burst. Just, it's sort of eye-catching, but also if you think about it, new growth is booming, but it isn't going to boom forever. And we still feel rather burned and cautious from fiscal 2008-ish, 9-10, when the bubble burst then and the aftermath of that. So we just want to be, again, conservative with our new growth numbers. Potential airport deficit due to COVID-19. I think we have mostly determined that that is unlikely. Brian could speak a little bit more to that. PFAS is another matter, and I think that's going to be more of a borrowing situation rather than from the airport's operating budget. The police reform bill, I need to get back to this with the chief, but while there are some very laudable components to that bill, there are also costs that we need to understand. Training, certifications, other impacts on the town that will relate in additional costs, will translate into additional costs. Now, I want to mention here, it's not on here, but it's come up since December 9th. The Affordable Housing Trust has requested and put forward a proposal for $475,000 in general fund monies that would cover the following: closing cost assistance, professional services, marketing, outreach, training, travel, and personnel costs. So we have met. Denise has been in on a meeting with Brian, myself, Tucker Holland, housing director, Christy Ferrantella, and town council, and Ken Bogrand, I think, was involved in that. So we've been talking about how best to fund the Affordable Housing Trust on a more stable manner going forward. And I don't know that we have that 100% worked out, but for fiscal 22, it's likely that town admin will recommend at the select board meeting next week that this request for $475,000 from the general fund budget, and that would most likely come from an increase in our short-term rental projection for fiscal 22. There are a couple of other initiatives or ideas that have been put forward, or proposals. One of them is using additional CPC funding, and I won't go into all the details of that, but that is most likely not going to be a fiscal 22 matter or request. That would be a fiscal 23 request, and Affordable Housing Trust would, again, most likely go to the CPC in the fall and make an application for the following fiscal year. There are two rather significant overrides being proposed, and I think Brian and I may have a bit of reservation about them, but not enough to say we don't recommend it. It's not really our call. It's more of a policy issue. One would be what is being called a safe harbor maintenance override for $15 million. That could, I'm just going to read from what the documents are that we've been sharing in our internal discussions. this would be used to serve between 30% AMI and 200% AMI for the purposes of maintaining safe harbor during this 5-year period. And if you all want to get deeper into this, I don't think Brian and I are prepared to do that today, but we could certainly bring Tucker in, and we would encourage you to be on the board meeting next week if you wish. And certainly we can come back to the FinCom after next week's board meeting for more details on this. The other override would be for $7.5 million to launch a pilot program serving between 120% and 200% AMI for the purposes of what they're calling a shared equity program. Oh, and I forgot, I'm sorry, Stephen Morey was also in on some of these teams. Sorry, Steve, I forgot. And this would, the way it's described it is that it would provide, in effect, down payment assistance to year-round Nantucketers to acquire an existing home here. And that, I think, is felt that it might need more definition and parameters and structure to it. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing that I think that I would add is that I believe that the $15 million, the safe harbor maintenance, may be cut down if it was to go forward this year to only what they need for next year. Because as part of the discussion, there was the discussion about the fact that they're still working through the original $20 million and $5 million, and that it may be better to only ask for what was necessary to continue the safe harbor maintenance at this point. And I think that may be the way they ultimately go. I think Tucker was receptive to taking that back to the Affordable Housing Trust as a recommendation that may be a better path forward at this point.
So again, this is really not final yet at all, but it is going to be a discussion at the board meeting next week. Okay, lastly, oh, sorry.
Sorry. Would those be select board warrant articles?
Yes, they would be sponsored by the select board.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. The last sort of unknown here is the impacts of a Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee interim recommendation. They put forward a recommendation that was adopted by the board last August, which basically puts forward some FEMA flood management, I forget what the technical term is, requirements for certain projects that are within certain coastal areas subject to flooding and or erosion. And it wouldn't impact projects that have already been designed. For example, the Harbor Master building, which already is going to be designed to these types of requirements. But something, for example, like the intersection improvement that we have been discussing at the intersection of Washington Street and Francis Street, that would be impacted by this recommendation, and it would most likely require additional funding to bring the grade up to a higher level. That's just an example. The next slide is future potential costs. And again, we don't really have numbers necessarily associated with any of these things, but we need to take into consideration the big picture here going forward. And there are some things on the horizon that we should be paying attention to. The board strategic plan, of course, the staffing study does still have some recommendations in it that I think we want to get back to at some point. The commuter shuttle, we were about a year ago, before COVID ruined everything, we were talking about a commuter shuttle that would potentially run direct from, say, 2 fairgrounds right into town, that people could use to, just go right into town to get to work. And we had asked the NRTA to let us know what that would cost. And Brian, Rachel, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a couple $100,000, if not more. And we never ended up budgeting it for fiscal 21, and we don't have it in our budget for fiscal 22. But potentially in the future, if we're going to get back to this type of thing, we may need to budget for it. Our 5-year forecast updates will most likely result in some future potential costs, of course, with increased expenses in a variety of areas. Our open space and recreation plan, this is something being worked on by planning. There may be some costs associated with that, most likely capital. The solid waste operator contract, as we know, and there was I think there was an article in the paper today about it. that contract expires in 2025, and we are very actively looking at options for what we're going to do at that time, and that might cost something. NRTA year-round service modifications might have an associated cost. The sustainability office, this is an item that is in the board strategic plan, and actually it is something that we are putting forward for at least the funding of a position in fiscal 22. PFAS, of course, is definitely going to be a future potential cost. Whatever comes out of the coastal resiliency plan and the master plan will all most likely have some kind of costs associated with them. All right, our next step slide is a bit outdated, obviously. In fact, it's completely outdated. We've done these budget reviews with the board and the school committee. You all are reviewing the budgets, but that timing is off now a bit. And of course, now we've rescheduled the town meeting from April 5th to June 5th. And the timeline has been modified. The rest of the slides, I think, are just backups. So we are prepared for, hopefully we are prepared for questions that you all might have. But if they're detailed about departments, that's next Saturday.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Brian. So I'm just going to go call you one by one and we'll go that way. George, any questions from you? You're muted, but you shook your head no, so I'm going to go with no. Okay. Joe, any questions from you?
Yeah, just a quick one, Brian. The debt service on one of your slides for fiscal 22 was about $10 million.
Correct.
Do you remember roughly what it was for fiscal 21 and fiscal 20?
Last year it was about $700,000 less if it's, I remember off the top of my head. Specifically relates to we permanently borrowed some of the $20 million that was for affordable housing because we had purchased property with it and there was no need to carry it with a ban. And the last pieces of, or some of the last pieces of the Nantucket Harbor SHMO project were added in fiscal 22. That pool went out, that interim pool with the Clean Water Trust was put out to bid and was included in the fiscal 22 calculations because we now have debt service associated with it.
Okay. And would you say the 111 million is sort of a, I don't know, positive and optimistic? I mean, given the concerns that we had for fiscal 21 and COVID?
I would say that I believe that the $111 million that we've projected that we can raise in revenue is reasonable and attainable. I think that some of the areas that we had the biggest concerns in for fiscal 21 being meals tax, because when we redid the budget in late April, beginning of May for the town meeting, we had no idea what the governor's regulations surrounding dining would be, or whether people would be able to travel. So I feel comfortable that the 111 million is attainable with the way that things have progressed through the first half of this fiscal year.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Peter Schaefer?
Yes, thank you. Brian, do you know what, maybe you showed it, I don't believe you did though, the fiscal 20 budget room and meals tax, how much was that?
The fiscal 20, I did not show it, but it was $5.5 million was the actual receipts.
Okay, that makes 4.9 look much more realistic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else, Peter? No?
No, I'm good.
Peter McEachern?
The only question I would have is on the current unknowns. Once you find out, or once you have information about those, it would be great to share, especially the citizens warrants that you people are staying up at night thinking that there are going to be some potential cost impacts. It's just good. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill?
The only real question I have is about this Affordable Housing Trust Fund override. So is that going to be proposed as a $22.5 million override plus $475,000?
I don't want to speak for the manager, but it would be my understanding that the recommendation would be the $475,000 in the budget, I believe, is going to the board next week. And it was my recommendation that only $7.5 million of that total $22.5 million be considered. One of the overriding reasons that I suggested that to everyone in the meeting the last time was because we still are working through the acquisitions and utilization of the $20 million override that was very graciously approved by the voters and the $5 million bonding authorization by CPC. So it was my suggestion and would be my recommendation to town administration that we consider only what's necessary in fiscal 22 for safe harbor maintenance and not take on a large authorization that won't be utilized for at least most likely another 1 to 2 years after 22.
But safe harbor maintenance is buying more properties, right?
It could be it would actually most likely be contribution to the development of the properties that have already been purchased or will be purchased before the end of fiscal 21.
Okay. Okay. Right. Steve, can I ask Stephen a question, Denise?
Sure, Steve.
Stephen, are you there? I can't see you, sorry.
Yeah.
Stephen, were you in that meeting?
No, I was not in that meeting.
Oh, I thought they said that you
I
were.
was
There were several meetings where some of these programs were discussed, but no, I wasn't in that meeting with Tucker and the trust fund.
I was with Libby and Brian and Tucker.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought they said Stephen, so that I was a little confused.
Yeah, between Stephen and I, we've covered them all.
Sorry, my daughter at school. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to understand if that was gonna be presented as like a full $22.5 million package, so that's even more than what we asked the last time.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm good.
Thank you, Jill. Chris, yeah, Joanna, I see you. I'll get.
Just along the same lines, Libby, did you say that was going to be discussed next Wednesday's select board meeting? Is housing's on the agenda?
Yes.
And that would include the timing or the potential CPC ask and timing of that?
Yes, but that I don't think will be a deep discussion because that request isn't going to be made until fall.
Yeah, fair enough. I just wanted to know if it was going to be fleshed out a little bit at some point.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, great. That's all I had. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks, Chris. Joanna?
Thanks. Really good presentation. Thank you. I got a couple of questions. One, I'm wondering, like, all of these like things that could potentially happen, is there like a tally sheet that you're keeping of what the potential impact could be? Because I list them off and I think, wow, it could be a big number. And how do you kind of plan and mitigate against that number?
Are we keeping an exact tally sheet? No. Do we regularly discuss the outstanding unknowns, and do I update the town manager and town administration on any potential changes? Yes, like one of those current unknowns is state aid. I can tell you that the governor's budget that was released yesterday pretty much holds us pretty close to level funding in terms of that. So I don't necessarily believe that state aid is a major unknown at this point, because typically the governor's number would be what I would call the high water mark, but there's been no indication that the House or the Senate is inclined to make any massive changes to those numbers in what I've heard so far. But anytime that we come to a conclusion or I see information that I think would materially change what we may have to do, we certainly convey it to the town manager so that we can at least begin the initial phases of planning on what we might have to do if what we think happens will come to fruition. So do I have an exact tally sheet? No, but I have an idea of what some of those could do to the budget if they were to come to fruition, and we do discuss those.
Right, because I'm thinking about, the Our Island home piece, the PFAS exposure, if the new, what you're calling the bubble burst happens, and the 35% steamship deficit, that's a lot of impact on the town budget, just those 4 things, right?
It could be, the steamship could be an impact, but I believe that there's some hope that if the steamship were to believe it was going to have a deficit in the year that ends on December 31st, 2021, that there'd be many discussions, as there was this year, when that possibility became a possibility, and the Commonwealth stepped up and said that they would not bill back.
Mhm, mhm.
It's important to note that the way the enabling legislation was written, it's the Commonwealth is obligated to cover the deficit and has the ability to bill the communities back. So if that looked like it was going to be an issue, I think that town administration would reach out to its elected representatives and again highlight to them that it would have a dramatic impact on our ability to operate, and it would be even difficult to be able to figure out how to fund it if we had to do it immediately. So
Mhm.
that one I think would be less of a risk than some of the other ones, because I think there'd be ways to mitigate that much easier than anything else.
Okay. I thought your idea about the community school and the Parks and Rec is a good idea. Do you see that more at, do you see that as a cost savings or more as a way to manage the system better?
We have not gotten into the exact costs yet. I would hope there might be some cost savings and perhaps some ways to increase the revenue as well. But we haven't even gotten that far yet. I don't think we would want to experience any kind of a significant cost increase.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, and then a question about last year in our citizens articles, we had that whole thing with funding some of the land bank's money. They were going to borrow our bond rating. And so my question is, did that happen or did it not? And then it did not happen. Okay. So, okay.
And they haven't put it forward again for
again. So when we were talking about that $10 million, well, I was just thinking about that. Okay, that's good. And then I guess the only other question would be to just I just need a little help understanding the our island home override for 2.5. So if it doesn't, so explain how that would play out.
So provided the FinCom makes the recommendation, and this discussion is on the assumption that they do, the article for the enterprise funds would be written in the specific funding sources for Island Home would list their general revenue projection, and then it would list $5 million from the general fund, and it would say raise and appropriate or transfer from available sources. But they would also say that it's contingent on a successful ballot question being passed. Okay.
Mhm.
And, okay. So if it passes the town meeting and it passes the ballot, then we are fine and we are free to raise and appropriate that $5 million within. It will permanently raise the levy capacity on an annual basis of the town. If it fails at either point, so either town meeting votes it down or it fails at the ballot. Let's say town meeting votes it down and doesn't approve the budget as presented or the article. It would actually be easier to fix at that point because we could make the adjustments to the warrant article immediately there. If it passes town meeting and it fails at the ballot, then we would have an unbalanced budget at that point because we would technically be able to operate, but we could not set a tax rate until we had balanced the budget by having a special town meeting to identify other available funding sources to fill that $5 million revenue requirement.
And that $5 million is only for 1 year of operations?
The 5 million is what we're projecting we need at this point to operate this year and into the future to sustain that.
Well, how far into the future?
Well, the 5 million override automatically, if it were approved, grows at 2.5%. I don't think that it
Forever.
Forever.
The 5 million is forever once it's added to the levy capacity. It's not a 1 year.
It becomes a self-funding mechanism.
It does. And it would, as we've talked about before, we're using the Island Home as the example, but right now it's funded through free cash and retained earnings, and this would fund it correctly on a go-forward basis.
Right. Okay. I just needed some clarification. That's great.
Did that help, hopefully?
Thank you.
Stephen.
Nothing for me that hasn't been asked.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we're done. Did I skip anybody? No? Okay. Brian, what's our total OPEB liability?
Right in the neighborhood of between 90 and 100 million.
Okay, thank you. And on the parking, incremental 2 parking or incremental 3 parking people, 2 seasonal and the 1, I'll ask Libby this one, give her a turn. Are they going to be self-funding effectively? Because unless they're writing enough tickets to fund their salaries, then why have them around to write tickets?
Well, it's more than just writing tickets. It's moving along with the timed parking restrictions so that there's more turnover, so that we don't have the parking problems that people believe that we have now. So eventually they might pay for themselves if we increase the parking fines, which has been discussed, or if we institute paid parking, which we have also discussed. Both of those things were being discussed right before COVID hit, and we have not gotten back to them. But the board, through its discussions as to the fiscal 22 budget, has basically said we're not putting paid parking forward this summer. And in any event, we need more than starting right now to plan for that.
Of course. Okay, thank you. Do we have I don't need it tonight, but is there a sum of all the things that were funded through the CHP program through Remain that the town then turned around and said, okay, after the first year of operations, we will now fund it ongoing? So it's great that the town, that we get someone to fund the, if you will, the trial period, and then the town picks it up. Do you have an idea of that number? And I don't need it tonight, but it just struck me as I was going through your budget report.
I don't know that we have that written up somewhere, and Greg and Rachel might want to chime in on this if possible, but that sort of thing, what jumps to my mind is the energy coordinator, the housing director. We did have some funds, I believe, from Remain.
Network of Care website was the thing was the specific example in your budget report.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
Network of Care.
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah, I was thinking personnel. But that is a good one. That is going to cost going forward. Yes.
Yeah, so I was curious to see what that number was. I don't
know if Rachel knows. Why don't we get back to you on that?
The Network of Care right now, it's $24,000 a year for the maintenance.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah,
no, I was just curious, Rachel, as to all the ones that have come before. So exactly the energy coordinator, the housing specialist, those kinds of things. So I know that Remain funded some of those for the first year, and then the town picked up and funds them in perpetuity. So, okay, thank you. Brian, free cash for our island home. It's not a one-time expense. So we're going to squeak by this year if it doesn't get passed, basically. You're muted, Brian. Probably on purpose.
Zoom 2, Brian, none. Well, if you remember this year, we actually funded it with free cash.
Right, I know.
But it's really, for next year, we're not proposing, and the warrant article motion will not be written with free cash. It will be written with the recommendation, provided you support it and approve it, of a $5 million override. The only reason that we're holding $3.5 million of free cash aside is that we would have to have a funding source should the override not be successful.
Right.
Otherwise, we'd have to go and cut the general fund budget, or cut it by $3.5 million, or find $3.5 million in other revenue sources somehow, some way. So the recommendation is certainly not to use that free cash again this year. The recommendation to the town administration, which I ultimately think will be to the FinCom, is for that same $5 million override. But we're protecting by reserving the free cash of $3.5 million for fiscal 22 in the event that the override is not successful.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just as a reminder for the FinCom, which I know you all remember, we did actually say motion to approve or motion to adopt on the $5 million override last year. And it did pass at the ballot by a 700 vote margin or 1,200 vote margin. I was surprised at the big margin of votes it got. So, okay. And my last two more questions, and I'm done, I promise. Libby, the Parks and Rec thing with community school and Maria Zoda's article, which we said motion not to adopt last year. And that's, unless there's somehow it comes back up again, we won't debate it. We'll confirm these on March 1st, that we will stick with our original motions. I would offer that this might possibly satisfy that article, if this works.
It might, her concerns have extended beyond just flat recreational programming, but no amount of our explaining how maintenance of fields works has addressed that.
Thank you, Libby. I thought for potential there's some good news, but there you go.
It could be though, it could be good news.
And then my last observation is an observation. So when I take a look at where your savings are going to come from in an economic downturn, it's primarily going to come from personnel because that's the biggest chunk of town spending, right? And so my caution or my observation is that anytime we add someone, we should really think about that if they're going to be almost our first stop for saving money in the future. Not that person in particular or that role in particular, but just in general, you know. And I think the town is very prudent and very cautious in the way that they add people. And I, you know, applaud you for that and continue to credit you for doing it that way, because as it is your, you know, of the, I think 5 or 6 things that were listed, I think 3 of them are related to personnel in terms of what we would do if all of a sudden there was a dramatic problem. So, you know, that was my comment to that. So thank you for doing it that way and continuing to do it that way. So that's all the questions I had. I actually had more, but they were already answered by other people's questions. So thank you for an excellent presentation. Rachel and Greg, very nice to see you. And I don't have any other further questions, and we'll go through them in detail when we speak to the departmental heads on February 6th. So no, this was very helpful. Anybody else want to add anything before we stop the budget presentation part and move on to Capcom? No little hands raised. Okay, so all right. So I spoke to, next item on the agenda is a review of the Capcom. I know, I'm quite sure everyone's read it. It is, I want to give Stephen Welsh a shout out. He couldn't join us tonight. And I think the coordination, this particular go round of discussions with Capital Committee has been significantly improved, much easier for us. We had information much earlier in the cycle and much more clarity earlier in the cycle. And so that was very appreciated. And and Peter McEachern, you know, thank you for your service on Capcom, because I know it takes a tremendous amount of time and it's great that you're there. Brian, so as Stephen couldn't join us, do you want to just hit the highlights of it? And
Sure.
just a reminder to the Finance Committee, as far as individual projects, I suggest we discuss them with the departmental heads and let them explain the rationale behind what they're asking for. Anything else in general, whether it's funding sources or the way it's going to work, you know, obviously you can ask Brian tonight, but I think the details of, you know, why are you spending this on that can be better suited in the budget reviews. And so just to kind of frame up how the next part of the discussion will go. Brian, I'm turning it over to you.
You want me to share the screen and go through it, or do you want to just have me answer specific questions? How would you like to do this, Denise?
I think share the screen, Brian, and just kind of run through the highlights that Stephen presented last night at the select board. I watched his presentation last night at the select board. I'm sure you all did too. So, but we'll let Brian scroll a bit. Why are you smiling, Joe?
Go through all of this. Okay, so I'll start with just a summary of allocations. The general fund, the capital program committee, and I welcome Peter's input as I go through this if I miss anything from their input. Before I start that, Denise, I do want to recognize, even though he couldn't be here tonight, the new assistant finance director, Rick Sears, because he was really instrumental in working with the Capcom this year, and I think was really, really instrumental in help shepherding this process through as liaison with the finance department. So I think that was really helpful, and I certainly do appreciate and welcome the work that he did with the Capcom as well. So with that being said, general fund, the list is recommended at $23.6 million. There is $6.5 million of facilities, which probably is where most of the questions will come through about how we're doing that, as it's been called the facilities borrowing mechanism. $5 million, just over $5 million in general, and then $7 million in transportation related projects. The fire department has just under $1 million of recommended capital by the Capcom. IT has just under about 180,000, I think it is, of capital. Marine has 590,000. Police has 900,000, and the school has 1.5 million, with town administration having about $450,000 worth of approved capital for a grand total of $23.6 million that was recommended. Enterprise funds, you can see there, the airport typically has the largest share of recommended projects, most of them funded by the AIP entitlement programs with the FAA, $25.3 million. Sewer has $6.4 million, and Wanacomment Water has $1 million of request and recommended approval by the Capcom for $32.72 million. How we propose getting to the $23.6 million of projects. Ambulance Reserve Fund would have a transfer from there, borrowing through and within the levy limit of $1.77 million. Majority of that is related to the sidewalk improvement plan, which is on a 10-year path, and we have been funding that with recommended borrowings annually that have been financed within Proposition 2.5. Capital exclusion of just under $600,000. Debt exclusions of $8.77 million. The facilities borrowing mechanism, which I'm sure will generate some questions, of $6.5 million for the long-term maintenance of our facilities. Free cash of $4.9 million, and raise and appropriate of just under $1 million. Enterprise funds, we are recommending $31 million worth of borrowings, reserve of $1 million, and retained earnings of just under $1 million, which leads us to the $32.7 million of recommended capital projects for the enterprise funds. On this slide, we have all the projects in the general fund as well as enterprise funds of greater than $1 million. We have Newtown Road improvements of 1.2 million, road improvements, maintenance island-wide, including bike path maintenance of 1.25 million, the sidewalk improvement plan that I mentioned, 1 million, Surfside area roads reconstruction phase 2 Lovers Lane, which was on the warrant last year, 3.2 million, Children's Beach stormwater pump is recommended by Capcom at 3.3 million, but I can tell you that that will be when we present the capital to FinCom and the motions, that will actually be a recommended motion of 4.3 million. It's since been learned that from the engineers that we need to increase that number. So that will change as we continue through this process. Nobody or Fieldhouse supplementary funding of $1 million. And then this campus-wide improvement plan for the school of $1 million. $16.6 million worth of airport improvement projects funded, majority funded by the FAA and the State Aeronautics Division of Mass DOT. Fuel farm rehab, a second supplemental request of over $1 million. Groundwater and soil investigation related to PFAS, 6.7 million. The CMOM program is recommended at 2 million. South Shore Road sewer is recommended at 3.5 million, and the continued water main replacement program for Wanacomment at $1 million. What we've done here is what we do every year. We show the general fund projected taxpayer impacts. What I would like to highlight and note on this is that this is if every project hit the tax rolls at exactly the same time, being all happening in this case in fiscal with using fiscal 21's data. They never hit all at the same time. We manage and try to add permanent debt at a time that makes sense and doesn't have a dramatic impact on the tax rate. Some of the debt that gets added certainly is outside of our control, anything to do with the Water Pollution Abatement Trust or the Clean Water Trust money that we get. We're at the mercy of when they go to borrow, but all of the debt that we authorize and go to market with, we always try to time and manage in a way that does not impact the tax rate to the greatest degree. So that's this shows simply that what it would look like if we added everything all at the same time.
I think that covers it, Brian, really, because all the rest of the report is the process.
Yes, there's more
So-
process and recommendations. So I don't know if you want me to go through all of that or.
No, I don't think, I mean, I'm sure everyone's read the report and if not, we can always ask questions
Okay.
at another time when Stephen Welsh is at the meeting. So, Peter McEachern, any comments from your side as you're the person on the ground with Capcom?
Oh, just to remind everyone here that these meetings start taking place in August and they go through, what was it, last week? A lot of efforts put into them. Not all projects are approved. And there was one important thing that former select person Atherton brought up last night that I will repeat. The concern was, gosh, there's a lot of potholes was his specific item, but a lot of projects that need to continue as maintenance items. And those are hashed out during each and every capital committee meeting, that we not only think about new monies on new things that aren't in existence, we also put effort into existing fixed assets and places on the island that need to be maintained. I would definitely say that the committee is robust. It's not a rubber stamp committee by any means. We do get excited occasionally, but Stephen and his team, which consists of Libby and Brian and the entire finance department. I mean, there's a lot that goes into these documents. It may be perceived as being dry, but I think they're extensive and some of the most extensive documents that I'm glad to be part of. So, Stephen Welch, good job.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions about this? Just raise your hand if yes. Joe? And Jill, I'll get you next. Thanks.
Sorry, Jill. Two quick ones. I was curious, and I don't know whether this is a Brian or a Peter kind of question, why the Lovers Lane project, the road development for Lovers Lane was kind of was proposed to be funded, but the $3 million for Waite Drive was not. Any particular perspective on that one?
Sure. So the Lovers Lane, well, to answer it this way, the Waite Drive, that funding that went forward last year was supplemental funding for Waite Drive and Amelia Drive, the total project of about just over $6 million. And the funding that we had already had wasn't enough to do the entire project. So last year we had asked for the additional $3,027,000. We are not, what we're going to do is do the Waite Drive portion first, and we have the funding for that along from previously allocated articles, along with the $1.5 million Mass Works grant that we received. So at this time, we're not proceeding with the Amelia Drive work. We was determined to do the Waite Drive work, and then the Amelia Drive work that was in the beta report would be done at a subsequent time period and is not envisioned to be able to be done all at this time. So that's why that piece was left out. Lovers Lane, the phase 2 of the Surfside area road construction is slated to still go forward with the Lovers Lane portion. So that's why that was included again in this year's request and then ultimate recommendations.
Great, thank you. And a second quick question on the airport CapEx, the $6.7 million for PFAS research and whatever work. How good is that number? And is that a number? I mean, it just seems a gigantic number for a project, a problem that has been evolving so quickly for the town. And is that 6.7 an expense that will be borne by the FAA the way many other expenses, or is that really 6.7 million to Nantucket?
It's a good question. It's borne by the enterprise fund. So whether there's FAA reimbursement, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's an evolving question for the airport. The 6.7 is the number that they have given, that they've put forward as the need for the borrowing authorization. So I'm confident that the individuals that developed it and gave it to us to include have provided a number that at this point is what is needed and necessary.
So it's based on estimates for testing and various types of remediation that might be needed to deal with PFAS in the ground if they find it.
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Denise.
Sure, Joe, thank you. And if you can remember that question for the airport, when we speak to the airport folks on the 6th, would be great versus relying on me to remember. Good. Jill,
Well, I did watch last night, and it's always better for me to see it a couple of times so it sinks in. And I totally agreed with what Rick said, so I was glad he said it. About the roads needing attention. That's important. And Peter, you just said that you guys were super, you get excited about a lot of projects. I'm wondering if Capcom is ever going to get excited about affordable housing. Is that an area of funding for AHTF? Can it even work that way? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, as you probably know, Jill, we act on items that are brought to our attention. We don't create discussions based on what a member wants to do or doesn't want to do. So we're acting on department heads, town admin, select board, those type of requests.
Okay, I'm asking just because it seems like we've got quite some big ticket overrides coming, and so.
Yep.
I know you all have some money there as well, but.
for example,
Okay.
Jill, when Chris asked at our last meeting of the school, would you ever come forward with a capital request to put up housing for teachers?
Oh, yeah, that's right, he did.
It would have to come through a mechanism like that. So, and then capital committee would review it.
I think it's great. I think it's great that Libby and the operating budget and Brian addressed the employee perspective of housing on island, because let's face it, whether it's those of us who already live here or those we're trying to keep here, it's an issue that, yes, the private side for the most part is addressed, but it's good to hear that the public side is looking at it both from a operational expense and then as a capital expense.
Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. So we will not be discussing any of the warrant articles tonight. Our next meeting is actually, I should really have, it's amazing how unplanned sometimes I am. March 2nd, correct? Is that correct? No, March 4th, sorry, February 4th.
Peter, that's great.
I was about to skip all of February. No, February 4th is our next meeting at 4 o'clock. And on that, I have invited 3 of the warrant article folks to come and speak to us. So Megan Perry to come back again to talk about her article with the water. Mr. Beretta with the citizens warrant article, or the warrant, the ATM 2021 warrant being sent out earlier than 1 week before, and the road sign. Keith, his last name just escaped me. So I've invited those 3. I have only heard back from Megan that she probably won't attend. So those are the ones on our agenda for the 4th. And Brian, remind me again, we agreed something else is going to happen on the 4th.
I had discussed with you about adding the county review of the county.
Oh yeah,
budget
that's right. We're going to do the county review.
The county commission.
Yeah, we're going to do the county commission review that those of you who watched select board last night would have seen. So yeah, so that's on for the 4th. And then after the 4th, we will not have another meeting again until March 2nd.
We'll actually meeting on the 6th.
Not according to my schedule.
Aren't we meeting on February 6th with all the budget reviews?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I thought one of these.
If you want to move forward into March, but
No. It's I'm sorry. Apologies. Yes, we are the Saturday the 6th. I was thinking of these regular FinCom meetings, the ones that we have during the. Sorry, Brian, you're right. Thank you for that reminder, because everybody would have gone all away and said, oh, the 6th is free now too. Great. So, okay, with that, no other business from my side. Any other business from anyone else? We have a other business item. Anything else from anyone on FinCom? I don't see any hands raised, so may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So made.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. By roll
Second.
call. Oh, and before I do, Libby, Brian, Greg, Rachel, thank you so much for the preparation and the good discussion tonight. Much appreciated. And roll call to adjourn. Peter Schaefer,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes.
Peter McEachern,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Denise, I. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you and see you on the 4th.
Thank you.